You know, our good friend of the channel, Bruce Wayne, always enjoys we do something on the Broad Street Bullies or the Flyers from pretty well 73 to the early 80s because there's a lot of history to map out. But did you know that Reggie Leach was not traded to the Flyers from the Seals? Montreal may have not lost to the North Stars in the 1980 NHL quarterfinals, and maybe, just maybe, Montreal could advance to the finals again that year, beating the Islanders or playing the Islanders. We're going to put it together. Like Reggie Leach didn't start his career with the Flyers. He ended up with Philadelphia in a weird set of circumstances. Now he was a high draft pick for Boston well before he was traded, but I don't think Boston was thinking with the right head. They wanted to get a certain what do you call experience on defense, and a February 23rd, 72 trade, which ranks to me as one of the worst in Boston history. They traded Reggie Leach and someone who've interviewed before, very solid defenseman Rick Smith and Bob Stewart, to Boston for Don O'Donoghue and Carol Vadnais. But 2 years later, right after Phillies won their first cup, Leach, who was not on that 74 team, was sent by the California Golden Seals, who again traded Vadnais for him. This is what the package was. Al McAdam, who scored a winning goal for Minnesota in 1980. Of course, California and Cleveland merged, and they also became part of the Minnesota franchise. Larry Wright, a first-round draft pick, which he wasted with Ron Chipperfield, and future considerations of George Pousseau. So it was a weird track. And what's interesting about Reggie Leach, ladies and gentlemen, he was never a goon, but goons helped him do what he can do. Now we all know Reggie came to first prominence with Bobby Clarke's former team, the Flin Flon Flyers. Now when Flin Flon was in the WCJHL, uh, unbelievable numbers: 131 points in 59 games. The 6 feet 180 pounder, the Riverton Rifle, as we call him, had 87 goals and 208 minutes in penalties. Where did he find the time not to score 100 that year? Now 69 in limited action with Flin Flon of the WCHL. He had 36 goals in 22 contests. In 1970, he had 65 counters in 57 games. So over 3 seasons, ladies and gentlemen, more than 185 counters. Now, he did break into 816 with Flin Flon again. That 111 13 points in that 66-67 season. Now 67 counters that year. He led the MJHL playoffs in points with 30 and goals in Flin Flon in 67. He also scored 6 goals in 6 Memorial Cup games for Flin Flon in 67. Now named to the MJHL All-Star first team with Flin Flon in 67, he led again the WCHL with 87 goals that year. This was not broken until the guy he was traded for was drafted, Ron Chipperfield, in 73-74. A lot of connections with Reggie Leach here. Now, he was on the WCHL's first All-Star team with Flin Flon in 68 and led the WCHL playoffs with 13 goals in a line, of course, with Bobby Clarke in 69. WCHL All-Star first team again with Flin Flon in 69 and was made the team's captain in 1970. Now, he won the WCHL's Brown Ridge Trophy as the league's top scorer with 111 points for Flin Flon in 1970 and led the WCHL in goals with 65 with Flin Flon in that 70 campaign. He also led the WCHL playoffs with 16 goals for Flin Flon in 1970. He won the MVP of the league that year and was named first All-Star team. Now, after all of this, he signed his first contract June 5th, 1970, again for Boston. Had his first game in January of 71 against Chicago, and a final game for Detroit March 30th, 83. Now, did retire in 1964, and he's vaunted number 27, again, was a big part of the 1975 Flyers championship. Now, he did win the Conn Smythe again in 1976 as the playoff points leader and playoff goals leader with 19. Now, 50 goal seasons again in 76 and 1980, and of course the 1976 season, 80 total goals, regular season and playoffs. Now he did play 56 games for the 72 Boston team that went on to win the Stanley Cup, but was not with the squad for the playoffs since he'd been traded. Now he had a good run in California, but again, we're not going to talk about that much. It's kind of weird how it worked. When Philadelphia got rid of him, he was released in March 24, 82, then was signed by Detroit in the offseason. He was eventually bought out and released by Detroit June 15, 83, then signed with the Montana Magic Independent CHL team in October 83 in the hopes of getting back to the NHL. Never did it. So many nicknames for him: the Rifle, the Riverton Rifle, and of course the Chief. Now his career beyond hockey has been quite interesting. You know, he's done a lot with Aboriginal communities throughout the years. He worked in automobile sales and insurance industries and eventually opened his own landscaping company before devoting himself full-time to coaching, community work, and his Shoot to Score project to bring hockey schools to more First Nation communities. Now, when I met him at the Ealer Bar First Nation many years ago, he's a very personable guy, very cool with the people. But he did tell me one thing. He didn't like one nickname. Boston called him Little Beaver in 71. Pretty weird. But you know, can you imagine this, ladies and gentlemen? He could have jumped to the WHA. The Alberta Oilers took him in the initial WHA draft in 72. And the big thing, a money player, he scored 8 career playoff game winners during his short career with Philadelphia in the postseason. Now, ironically, he changed from his number 27 for a few days when he wore a Philadelphia number 5 jersey for 2 road games in California during the 75 season. Allegedly, his jersey was left behind. Now, he's also named the Western Hockey League's All-Century Team member and an all-time Flin Flon team member in 99, which was pretty good. Now, he was mostly offense, but was asked to play killing penalties for the first time in 79-80 season for Philadelphia, which ironically was their last trip with the Broad Street Bullies to the Stanley Cup. Now, a big part of the alumni game at the 2012 Winter Classic for the Flyers. Now, what really stands out for me is you got to wait for a player to develop. Like the rough stats would tell you there was going to be something going on with Reggie. And this was kind of weird, ladies and gentlemen. My dad had a theory. When he heard he was finally with the Flyers, he said, there's no way he's not going to be a superstar. And I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, look at Reggie Jackson, Reggie Smith, anybody named Reggie. Later on, of course, Reggie Miller in basketball. Anybody named Reggie is usually going to have a serious attempt at success. But mired with the Oklahoma City Blazers in 71 made no friggin' sense at all. Now, again, traded for basically, Carol Vadnais, one of the worst trades of all time. Just to recount, ladies and gentlemen, 1967, 67 goals. 68, 87 goals. 69, 36 counters. 1970, 65. If you are telling me he was available, number 3 pick for Boston in 1970, can you imagine the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs could have got him? Montreal could have gave up Jacques Laperriere. Toronto could have gave up Brian Glennie because Carol Vadnais was that same style, could play defense and offense. But was Reggie Leach worth more than Carol Vadnais? Of course. I don't know if it was racism because he was a Manitoba player or an Aboriginal player, but to be mired in California, and like I said, he was there 3 seasons. And ironically, not the best on defense. In 2 key seasons with California, he was minus 104. And so he ended up with the Flyers next season, plus 53 and plus 73. So he went from minus 62 with California to plus 53 with the Flyers. Unfriggin' believable. And that 75 season, again, that's his most underrated season because he combined for 53 goals in a regular season and playoffs. So tremendous stuff. So Reggie Leach, the trade that we still shake our head about, but the 74 Cup was purely Bobby Clarke's lead. But as soon as Reggie come up, and he almost had enough to beat Montreal in 76, and he almost had enough to beat the Islanders in 1980. And what really hurt them, I think, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't have enough on defense to score a ton of goals. Now, if the Flyers were smart, which we weren't, they should have traded for Carol Vadnais to play with the Flyers with Leach, because he had, he would have done really well. Or they had Tom Bladen, of course, but he needed a second offensive defenseman. Somebody like, and he had Daly, but it wasn't enough. So they were one player away, and that player would have been Carol Vadnais. If Flyers would have made a more big trades or steal trades, they would have swept most of the 70s, but that's the way it goes. Goon hockey, and a lot of referees were against them after the 75 season. And Montreal had as many goons as the Flyers, but they weren't getting the calls like the Flyers was. Dave Schultz said it best. He said, when I skate on Toronto or Montreal ice, I get automatic penalty. And he wasn't lying. It was a rough time. A lot of the penalties I saw in Philadelphia shouldn't have gotten. And okay, you can beat up the Russians, but you can't beat up the other teams in the league. That's the way I saw it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we're doing here with our Broad Street Bullies tributes, like our good friend Bruce Wayne, not the original, because what the fuck would Michael Keaton be doing on his channel, slumming with an Acadian Jew on a Tuesday afternoon? We don't know. Maybe it is Michael Keaton. Anyway, if you like what we're doing, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. But never trade Reggie Leach. First law of Fight Club, or first law of Aboriginal Fight Club, you don't trade for Reggie Leach. For anything, you keep him. Can you imagine if Boston would have kept him? It boggles the mind. Esposito, Orr, and Leach on the power play. It boggles. Have a good one. Bye.